Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving holiday. And welcome to the second episode of the Dean's Fireside Chat series here at the College of IT at Western Governors University. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. Joe Dery. I'm the Dean of Data Analytics here at Western Governors. And we are joined today by a very special guest for our second episode, Moving Beyond Dashboards, Cindy Howson. Cindy is the Chief Data Strategy Officer at ThoughtSpot, which if you don't know what that is, you're about to, and I'm really excited for you to get that introduction. And she's also the host of the Data Chief podcast, which if you haven't had a chance to watch, make sure you check out her LinkedIn after the webinar and look back through some of those episodes are upcoming. Cindy is an analytics and BI thought leader and expert with a flair for bridging business needs with technology. She was previously also a Gartner Research Vice President, and as the lead author for the Data and Analytics Maturity Model in Analytics and BI Magic Quadrant, she was also a popular keynote speaker. She introduced new research in data and AI for good, NLP BI search and augmented analytics, and brought both the BI bake-offs and innovation panels to Gartner globally. She's frequently quoted in MIT, Harvard Business Review, Information Week, and is rated a top 12 influencer in big data and analytics by Analytics Insight, Solutions Review, and Humans of Data. In 2022, CDO Magazine named her a leading data consultant and global data power woman. More recently, Cindy was awarded Best Motivator by Women Leaders in Data and AI. It is an absolute honor to have her here with us today as we discuss moving beyond dashboards. Cindy, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much, Joe. What a long bio.
You know, there's so much that you've accomplished, and I'm so happy that you're here to share your experiences with our students. So maybe as a way to kick off, before we dive into BI and dashboards and self-service experiences, would you tell our students, our prospective learners, our alumni, and our guests a little bit about who you are, your career journey, and how you ended up as a Chief Data Strategy Officer?
Sure. So I started in BI and data about 30 years ago, originally as a report writer for Dow Chemical while I was living in Switzerland. And I really just have had a steady career progression going from report writer to then an analytics leader, implementing BI tools globally, then later as a consultant and industry analyst. My work at ThoughtSpot, I would say, hopefully is the crowning chapter of a long career where I get to work across the industry with so many cool companies, whether it's Disney streaming, for example, or the Mayo Clinic, helping them use data to drive either engagement, which shows are people watching, or to provide healthcare outcomes. And not only do I get to work with the customers, I actually get to work on the technology that is disrupting the BI and analytics industry. That's my day job. I'm a working mother, 2 kids in college, or now one is about out of college, one is working, and they both use data in their jobs, ironically. But I like giving back to the community, and this is why I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to the students, the alumni at Western Governors.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Cindy. And, you know, I have 2 kids myself. I'm hoping one day maybe they'll be data scientists or analytics. We'll see what happens. Their mother is a data scientist as well. But I think
There you go.
the jury is still out on that one, so we'll see what happens.
And well, I have a prediction though that the data is just part of everyone's job. So my daughter would never describe herself as a data scientist. She's actually a marine biologist, but she collects data and she analyzes data. And my son, well, he did take some analytics programs and has a degree in strategic business intelligence, but he's really a football player. And so talk about a data-rich industry, it's statistics, it's player performance. So I think data is part of everyone's job, regardless of what title you have.
That's a great point. And I think, as you know, especially for the students and alumni and prospective students that are on the call right now too, it just goes to show you the potential job opportunities that are out there if you understand and appreciate or are excited by data and by the ability to mine for some of these patterns, to be able to drive action and affect change. there's really no shortage of roles for that's for sure. And you could really go into a lot of different disciplines. In my career, I was in sales at one point, I was in marketing, another finance, supply chain. The possibilities are really just endless. And if we
Yeah.
start thinking about some of the evolutions that are now happening across these industries, whether it's private sector, public, government, whatever it is, the one question that I at least get asked often is, what is BI and how does BI translate into standard reporting or push reporting or fixed reporting? So maybe to kick us off, how would you interpret BI from your perspective? What does it mean to you? And are you noticing an evolution in that space?
Yes, there is definitely an evolution. And I want to come back to your comment, though, about the job opportunities. We've been hearing in a difficult economy the number of people getting laid off,
Mm.
and yet the very healthy sector continues to be the data analytics and AI. And in fact, I ran a poll just in the last 2 weeks that 81% of organizations are still saying it's either difficult or very difficult to find great talent. Now, great talent also corresponds to your question, Joe. Are we talking BI or are we talking analytics? And state of the art keeps changing. That is one reason why I've been able to stay in this space for so long, is that at least every 5 years, there is a major wave of disruption. So it is constantly new and exciting. When I first started, we didn't even call it BI, we called it decision support systems, and they ran on the mainframe. BI was our industry's first attempt at really driving a kind of self-service
Mhm.
where you didn't necessarily have to write SQL code or on the mainframe, whatever code, to get to your data. But that first generation of business intelligence tools, they really empowered IT professionals, not not really the data analyst and not the business user. The business user would get a parameterized report. Tables was the preferred way of consuming that information. These first generation tools didn't even support visualization. So today, BI to me is a legacy term, and we prefer to call it analytics.
Mhm.
There's different levels of analytics. The first very basic level we would call descriptive analytics, which might be a little more report centric, but BI as a term is kind of a declining term.
Makes a lot of sense. And I can remember when I first started at AMC, we had OBIE reports, Business
Yes.
Object, Bob J was around for a little bit. And of course, there was always trusty Excel as well. But what's interesting is, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, as we start moving more into analytics and we see the evolution, the world of standard reporting, push reporting, fixed reports that get delivered, or maybe you go and view a report when it refreshes, seems to be challenged a little bit. And we start seeing this push more for self-service, where users can come in and they can start to get access to some of these data sets and these attributes as needed, and potentially create some visualizations on the fly and maybe share some of that. So, what have you been seeing in the marketplace? Are companies starting to make this? And if they are, what are some of the questions they're asking? What are some of the challenges that they might be coming across?
Yeah, so self-service analytics is really on every data leader's and every business leader's agenda. And even it is now a boardroom conversation where CEOs will ask me, how do I create a data-driven organization? Or how do we stop our IT team from being a report factory or a
Mhm.
dashboard factory? I want to get to insight, and beyond insight, I want to get to action. So, to do that, we have to stop this whisper down the line of where I have a question and I have to ask an expert to answer that question. They take their best guess at what data answers it. And then I say, no, well, maybe that is the first question, but let me let me drill down into that or explore that. And so to really get to true self-service, we have to make it super easy so that the business person can ask the questions themselves. The data team may still provision the data, and provision it in a governed way. So what we do not want is spreadsheet chaos. That's not self-service. That's actually dangerous. I think when we think about privacy, some of the GDPR or CCPA privacy laws, we don't want to have ungoverned self-service. We really just want simplicity, but at scale.
Mm. So if we wanted to get to that simplicity at scale, and you mentioned a little bit around governance as well, for example, what are some of the precursors that companies are thinking about to prepare for that journey? Like, are they trying to get canonical data layers created? Are they creating these business intelligence competency centers? Like, what are some of those first steps?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is, well, I would say having a data strategy that
Mm.
aligns to the business strategy is probably the first step. Now, some may, because we like shiny things and new tools, for some, the first step is, well, let me go buy a cloud database platform, or provision a cloud database platform, and let me buy some of these modern tools, whether it's ThoughtSpot or Data IQ or Tableau even, and I'll take it from a technology viewpoint. But really, you should start from a business viewpoint of what are the business questions I'm trying to answer and how is data part of that. So I'll share with you a guest I just had on the podcast that I really loved because their mission is also about minimizing plastic in our world.
Mm.
So this is a company in the UK, the Modern Milkman, and they want to rid bottles. So they deliver milk in glass containers on your doorstep. And so their questions were, where are our subscribers? How often are they subscribing? Are they getting milk on a daily basis? What
Mhm.
else are they buying? Is it the orange juice? And data is key to their strategy. If they deliver milk inefficiently, then they lose their margins. So you have to look at how data improves your business, and then it's aligning to the outcomes, the right people, the right organizational model, as well as the technology and the processes.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So I think this is a great opportunity to introduce a little bit about ThoughtSpot and how it's playing in this space, Cindy. So as you start talking about doing some of these things at scale, the ease of use, and being able to have that platform to really make that transition, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about what ThoughtSpot is, maybe a little bit about what makes it unique and why you're passionate about it?
Yes. So ThoughtSpot, I joined ThoughtSpot 3.5 years ago, coming from a large advisory firm, Gartner, where I had been evaluating BI vendors for a number of years, and based on hands-on testing. So at different chapters in my life, I deployed them, different chapters, I evaluated them. And I want to go back to that first job at Dow Chemical. And I think about one of my customers at that time, Bob Lee. Bob had questions around plant capacities, and he wanted to know what were the capacities for this particular chemical product. Now, that wasn't Bob's real question.
Mm.
And yet, what I gave him, he was like, wow, I didn't know we could view the data this way. I was able to pull the product codes together in a way that nobody had been able to. But really, his real question was, what are the capacities? And if I take these plants down, what is the impact on the market pricing? Because one of the plants had formed a crack, and it was a safety issue.
Mm.
And that cracker actually did explode. Nobody was hurt. But those were Bob's real questions. Well, to get to that, and he's trying to tell me, and I'm trying to code it, that's not a very efficient process.
Right.
So, as I was tracking trends in the industry, now I'll go back to 2007, when I would talk to people about innovations at that time. I remember a conversation with a doctor who their practice was doing very cool things. I said, what about if I could give you a Google-like search and you could ask your own questions? What are the treatments where we have better patient outcomes? And his face lit up and said, that would be like magic. Well, 7 years later, this tiny startup, ThoughtSpot, briefed me on their product, Google like search. The founders came from Google and Microsoft,
Mhm.
and some other companies. And they said, we're going to put a Google like search interface on numbers. So Google works with text. Applying a search like interface to numbers. Different companies had tried, they never really got it to work at scale. ThoughtSpot was the first company to have it work at scale. And in talking to the early adopters of the product, they were all innovative companies. So I think about Walmart, Disney streaming, Hulu, some companies I can't name, but always pioneers in the data and analytics industry. So ThoughtSpot gives you a Google-like search interface so that non-analysts can ask their own questions. And we also have AI generated insights to give you the insights that you didn't even know to ask for. That was a
Which is
long answer, but I felt
it's
like the journey was important, how I came here or why I'm so excited about this technology.
it seems like serendipity in a lot of ways, talking to that doctor about the Google-like experience and then having that ThoughtSpot technology to be able to do that. And for those in the call that are used to traditional experiences when you're building out these dashboards, right? So once you actually have all the data prepared and you're moving out of your data warehouse or your data lake or your data lake house or whatever it is, and you're finally pushing it into whatever that vendor is, Power BI, Tableau, something, then you have a developer and they're putting it together. They're hopefully collecting business feedback. And then you're pushing these reports out in a lot of ways. And there's not a lot of necessarily custom development that's happening within the business itself. But as soon as you start moving to this notion of Google search, to your point, that kind of like experience where you don't necessarily have to be a developer to pull this, and you don't have to write the SQL code, and you don't necessarily personally have to have access to that data warehouse. It really starts to change the game. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on, given that the product is this kind of shiny thing and it's kind of mind blowing when people see what it can do in terms of that search functionality. What role does change management, for example, have in there? Like, how do you come
Yeah.
into a company and present that as an opportunity when there are already existing standard reports and push reporting and experiences that are out there?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, Joe. It's probably the single most hot topic from chief data officers and analytics leaders that I work with, because we often underestimate the importance of people change management. And yet we are profoundly changing the flow of data, and data is power in an organization. So some people are super excited about this, and some are very afraid.
Hmm.
And I actually see somebody typed in the chat about data mesh, another hot industry trend that is also challenging the way we work as an industry. So, a lot of times when you're met with fear, you have to get to the source of fear. And I find it interesting that some of the best analytics leaders, they do have a psychology background and behavioral science. And so what I often say is, one, you have to make people change management part of any data strategy. And anytime you're introducing a new process, new technology. And part of that people change management includes aligning the incentives, but also identifying the why. And I will also call this WIFM, or what's in it for me. And so the why might be from the business level, the head. The why also might be from the very personal, emotional or career progression. So if I think about if I want to give you an example of a company that has spoken publicly. So I'm going to
Mm.
take restaurants that everyone can relate to. Restaurants, open table during the pandemic. How do they know which restaurants, how do they staff them to do curbside delivery takeout? And even now that they're open, what are the staffing levels given that we have labor shortages? You want to make sure that you're optimizing for the right time of day. So their why is helping the restaurant stay open, and be profitable and have good service. If I think about the individual data analyst, their why, they want to help the restaurant perform efficiently, but it also might be about career progression, adding a sort, adding a filter. Having to work nights and weekends on low value requests is really a drudgery. And this is what has happened as the demands for data and the volume of data has increased, and yet we have this tight data analyst market, job labor market. So we've got to free up the time for the data analysts to work on
Mm.
things like bringing in external data, working on machine learning models that then they can operationalize. If they're only just working on low value dashboard requests, that really is a dead end career now.
I'm so happy you brought that up because it really, looks at the topic of, are analysts in the business analyzing the business?
Yeah. They're
And
they're not. There's not enough time. They
well, and,
barely get to the insight. So,
and I think that's a great point because I think when a lot of our students and alumni and prospective students do enter the job market, and a lot of them will enter as a data analyst or a business analyst to begin. A lot of times the requests that come across your desk are these reporting type things, right? It's adding that column, adding the filter to your point, changing a color. And before you know it, your queue, especially depending on the size of your company, can get very, very long. And you start
yes.
asking yourself and looking in the mirror and saying, when am I going to get to do that analysis that I learned about that data mining? And a lot of that talks about, okay, well, how can you be that influencer to start thinking about self-service and bringing the power back to the end user and to the individual contributor and the frontline managers to really be kind of the keepers of their own destiny in a lot of ways, and then allowing your team to really focus on the master data governance and maybe deploying a hub and spoke model, perhaps where they're kind of the center of that ecosystem, or starting to integrate AI and ML to your point, where you're actually figuring out how to get an AI feed through an API into that data set that's going to be showing within ThoughtSpot potentially. And that's really where you unlock the power of that talent pool for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it continues to be about how to do more with less. This is where all low code platforms, not,
Hmm.
not just ThoughtSpot, come into play because the pace of business has accelerated, the volume of data has accelerated. And so the gap between these analytics leaders, companies who can unlock the value of data versus the laggards, the ones who really are still report centric, slow, order taker mentality, legacy tools on premises, not in the cloud. That gap is just further widened. And so this is where we see a big difference in how companies are performing.
That's a great point. So at this point, before I ask you the final question that I have here, just out to the listeners, if you have questions for Cindy and ThoughtSpot or any topic for that matter, you heard her bio at the beginning, please throw them into the Q&A chat within the webinar, and we'll be able to ask those in just a moment. So given that we do have folks that want to get into analytics on the call, Cindy, and we have current students and former students in perspective, would you talk a little bit about some of the skills that you think are important for them to really focus on honing if they want to be able to get into a company that's going to be working in that space, using data to be effective, or potentially working at ThoughtSpot one day?
Yeah, and so I first want to say congratulations on choosing a field that, according to the World Economic Forum, is one of the areas that is growing the fastest. And they use different titles, some data
Hmm.
scientist, some machine learning engineer, and some big data architect. So different titles, but just a very exciting space. Where I see, I go back to, I think it was 2010 now, when Tom Davenport first and DJ Patel wrote that the data
Hmm.
scientist would be the world's sexiest job. I actually changed that last year and said that the analytics engineer is the world's new sexiest job. And I did warn Tom Davenport, like I was going to do that. And what does he think? And the difference is really in how quickly we can model data. But ever since DJ Patel and Tom Davenport wrote this, I think a number of universities and boot camps have created these data science programs without necessarily equipping the students for what is required in a business context. And
Hmm.
so we would teach them programming on a finished data set. And yet we wouldn't teach them, well, where does the data come from? Some of the foundational things of data architecture. If I interview an applicant and they've read some of the works of like Kimball's life cycle toolkit, then I already know, okay, good. They didn't just learn Python and R. They do have some idea of how data architecture comes into play. But the other thing is knowing a business domain. And so this can be anything. Choose a field that you are passionate about. For some, it might be sports. Other, it might be supply chain, marketing, but understanding the questions of that domain or that industry will already set you apart. And this is one of the challenges that I hear from all business leaders is that data scientists newly coming out of school, they know how to code, but they can't translate that code into actually a business application. And the other skill I would say is really data storytelling. And so either read some of these books if it's not part of the program, listen to some of these podcasts around data storytelling, but take the communication classes that are offered in the university because that will help translate into data storytelling as well.
I'm so happy to hear you talk about that. So here at WGU, we really prioritize three things when we think about analytics. And I like to describe them as three levers. One's a lever around programming foundations in data. One's a lever around mathematics, and one's a lever around business and power skills. And to your
Great.
point, you need to be able to tell that story, tie everything together. You got to be able to talk to a stakeholder at the end of the day and talk to the business and come out from behind the keyboard. No, trust me, I am definitely that person that likes to code till 3 o'clock in the morning. But I'm also that person that likes to go and talk to the business and let them vent and try to have that empathetic connection. And I will tell you, if there are folks on the call right now that are listening, like, I really enjoy the technical, but some of these other things kind of scare me. That's okay. And, there are still roles for you too. And you can go into some of that deep engineering, or you can build some development plans where, maybe you're going to take improv comedy. On the first Fireside chat, we talked about whose line is it anyway. And I had mentioned that I took 2 years of improv comedy training, which we can do for another session. I was also a bartender for a while because I was afraid of public speaking and didn't know how to start a conversation with people. So I went and became a bartender on the weekends.
Oh, that's
So
so great. Yeah.
something a little different to get me out of the coding, right?
Yeah, no, even well, and so I ironically, even though I speak around the world, I'm a bit of an introvert, but I love people and I love helping people. So that empowers me. But the CDO of Fitch Group shared that she recently did an improv class too. And that has helped with her storytelling techniques as well.
Oh, that is fantastic. So that
Yes.
means that everyone, now you've heard it on 2 episodes consecutively. You got to go check out Improv, Whose Line Is It Anyway on YouTube, something to be able to help you bring that storytelling, the business context, the ability to interact with the people that are around you, etc. So I'm sure you'll hear more about it in episode 3 as well. So Jory, why don't we switch over to the Q&A then? I see there's a couple of things that have started coming out.
Sure. A couple different questions. One of them is, with self-service analytic platforms on the rise, what is happening with the data analyst role and where do you see them fitting in?
Yeah, and so this is where I do see the data analyst becoming elevated,
Mm,
and their role might become an analytics engineer, where they're no longer just creating dashboards, they're helping ingest new data sources. Because analyzing only your internal data, that's important, but bringing in external data, whether it's like human mobility, what people are saying on Twitter about particular brands, things like this, um, credit card transactions, supply chain, it's weather. So bringing in external data is part of the role of the analytics engineer. But I also think for the data analyst, it is freeing up their time to work on the harder things. So you still might be creating, we call them live boards, not dashboards, because it just takes a few seconds and everything is live. Um, but creating formulas and things like this doesn't go away. Enabling things like data fluency, or some will call it data literacy, that is something that as an industry, we need the data analysts who are very data fluent to help become a champion and a change agent. So one of the data analysts that I work with, she's in her first job out of college. Elena Ressler at Schneider Electric. She's spoken on some talks. She actually got promoted and saved an average of 30 hours a week. So she now is a transformation specialist. So she uses data, but she's going around and actually transforming some of the legacy processes related to data. So there is the data analyst role doesn't go away. I would just say it kind of morphs and becomes much more impactful, more of a seat at the table as a true business partner rather than this order taker of low value work.
I love that response. And the first thing that came to my head is my prediction for the next sexiest job, which is analytics translator.
Ah, there you go. And there's somebody on LinkedIn, we debate this. He uses the term analytics translator. Um, and I do think that is also a very impactful role as well.
Yeah, when I was at Dell, before I heard about analytics translator, I used to refer to it as a analytics stakeholder engagement lead, which was a lot longer title. So I'm glad there's a shorter one that's out there now. But for
Yeah.
those listening, it's really that ability to connect the technical and the business and form that bridge. Because a lot of your stakeholders may not have seen any of this. They may not know what ML is, or they may see it as a black box. There's some fear that's
Yeah.
there. Or maybe they haven't seen math since high school because they haven't needed it for their role. And your job is to, demystify it a bit, gain trust, get their buy-in, build excitement, get on the soapbox, and really, preach the good word here on analytics. So love that answer though, Cindy. Jory, what else do we have?
Back to the self-serve, how do you recommend balancing the need for self-serve and helping the business sift through the noise to focus on relevant data?
Yeah, so that's where provisioning the data, and this depends how sophisticated are they as well. If you're newly moving to self-service, you want to start with a subset of the data that is familiar with them. So think about maybe the top 20 data elements rather than every element that is either in your data mart, data warehouse, lakehouse, whichever platform you're using. And then this is where use capabilities like AI generated insights to have the more important signals surfaced to them rather than having to first ask. This is also where I do think it's a matter of process, having things like lunch and learns or data days, data and donut days, some people do, where you're sharing best practices. What were the findings? How did you get to that? Is important as part of an ongoing basis of creating a data-driven organization.
I'm smiling right now at your data and donuts days, because when I used to teach some analytics courses at Bentley University, I used to bring donut holes and munchkins actually to class every day. And I can actually see some of my prior students in the attendee list, so they know what I'm talking about. Jory, do we have anything else?
Sure. Someone would like to have you confirm the donuts story.
Oh no, Dennis is confirming because he was one of my students in that class.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, I see. All right. Someone's looking for some recommendations on continued learning for data analytics roles to stay current on the trends, such as transitioning from report-centric mindset to a self-service philosophy, and tools and methods critical to the career success.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a continuous learner, and if you're in this space, you will have to be, because state of the art and technology keeps changing, and the window of innovation is getting faster and faster. If we were talking 5 years ago, less than 10% of organizations were even using cloud data platforms. Now, if you are not well versed in cloud data platforms, you are already out of date and behind. So I do think use the free resources that are available to you, whether it's on LinkedIn Live, or not LinkedIn Live, LinkedIn Learning, and Coursera, for example. But then also every year I publish a top 10 books for data and analytics leaders. There's some that are also good for practitioners as well. So read those books, listen to podcasts. So the podcast I host is The Data Chief. I really like the data engineering podcast as well. That's from the organizers at DBT. I think that's a great podcast. Cole Nussbaum has a podcast on storytelling with data that I also think is quite good. So those are some of the resources I would recommend.
I think the only thing I would add to that is, in addition to the technical side of the space too, based on the conversation we had tonight, especially some of those softer skills on the storytelling, the communication, the stakeholder engagement, change management, right? As you're looking at those podcasts and looking at those book lists, consider branching out into some of those areas, especially if you're an introvert or maybe you're not comfortable in some of those scenarios. Just being aware, reading about it, being aware of, if you're not going to be that person on your team, who is potentially? Do you need to hire somebody else onto the team that has that skill set? And that's where analytics really becomes that team sport, right? Where you together, when you think about all these different dynamics that you have in these power skills, you ultimately become that massive transformer, that ultimate powerhouse.
Yeah, that's very true, Joe. The other thing I would add is look at hackathons, either whether Western Governors hosts it, or I love Data for Good. So DataKind is an organization that hosts periodic hackathons. One, you meet different people, but you're also working with different use cases and data sets. One of our customers recently just did a hackathon on World Cup data, just to flex some different muscles, look at some fun data. And I just think it's a good way to constantly be reskilling, upskilling, and learning.
Absolutely. Great advice. So I know we're coming up on the 40-minute mark here. So Cindy, I think at that point we'll end the Q&A, and I just want to ask if there's any concluding thoughts, any last words for the students, the prospective students, alumni, and guests that we have on before we call it a night.
Yeah, so again, it's been a pleasure speaking to everyone. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter. I do try to stay engaged there. If you do want to learn more about ThoughtSpot, we do have a free trial. And then I hope you'll tune in to the Data Chief podcast. And as I said at the beginning, congratulations on choosing a fantastic field that I just see everything upward.
Cindy, thank you very much for sharing your very insightful comments with us and your stories and your experience. On behalf of everyone on the call, we really appreciate it, and we wish you the best of luck with everything with ThoughtSpot, and a very happy holiday season to you.
Same to you. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, everyone. Everyone, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We'll be back in mid-December with Mandy Plant. She's the Global Analytics Director at eBay. So we'll get to hear a little bit about the global e-commerce scene, especially leading into the holiday season where there's a lot of transactions, a lot of bidding, a lot of online purchases that are happening for the holidays. So I'm sure Mandy's going to have some very insightful comments to share with us then too. So on that note, we will call it a night. Thank you very much and take care.